get started. Hello and welcome. It's Tuesday night, so you're here for the high path avian influenza situational update. Tonight we have a really interesting variety show. Once again, I'm Ashley Hansberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council, and I'm very pleased to have you all here. This series is, of course, funded through the CAP program. So we're working in partnership with OMAFRRA to make sure we get the best information out there to our stakeholders in the small flock community. And as always, the biosecurity and disease page is your one-stop shop for everything high path avian influenza right now. So any new information, any links, news releases, recordings, they're all going to be hosted on that page on an ongoing basis. So stay tuned if you're looking for something. And Charlotte gave our producer update series a little shout out last week, so I'm going to do it once again. We have our first in-person session coming up next week. And then we have a couple other in-person ones as well as a virtual one. So it's a really good opportunity for commercial side poultry producers to get together and do some learning over the winter. So I mentioned that we have a bit of a variety show tonight, a couple of the usual characters. So we've got Tori talking about the unfortunate update that we have this week, which is a couple new infected premises that have been identified. Al's going to bring us up to speed on what he knows about the funding that's coming available for biosecurity equipment and supplies. And then Chris is going to just catch us up a little bit on the wild bird migration happening in a backyard near you. And lastly, we have a bit of a longer presentation from Dr. Kayla Price. So she's one of our board members and a partner in the industry from Alltech. So she's going to be talking about some visual clues on how you might better understand your overall flock health through poo. So we pre-recorded the presentation, and then she's going to hop on at around 7 o'clock to answer any questions you might have. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tori.
Thank you, Ashley. Good evening, everyone. Last week, I believe I mentioned that we had the two new infected premises. We had IP 38 and IP 39, both in the municipality of Adelaide Metcalfe, and both deemed as commercial poultry. So this week we're adding another infected premise in Ontario. This is IP 40, and it's in the municipality of North Middlesex. And this site will also be deemed as commercial poultry based on the information we've received. And then there will be a control zone around it, which we are working on, and it should be on the website shortly. So things are progressing well at all active sites. There's no delays at this current time. So that's good news. I mean, as good as it can be right now. But furthermore, on actual good news, we did release an entire primary control zone, which is another step in the right direction. So the primary control zone 91, which is around IP 27, township of Zora, has been released today. So if you're within that control zone and have movements that involve another active primary control zone, you still will be required to have permits. However, if you can avoid the current zones that are still up in the area with any of your movements entirely, then we don't require anything further in regards to surveillance or movement. So that's another zone off the list, moving in the right direction. And no other news so far, just the new infected premise since last Tuesday. Processes are all status quo, and I'm not aware of any bumps or hiccups at this time. And the news just makes me want to keep emphasizing just to make biosecurity your best friend. And hopefully next week I'll bring some better news.
Thank you, Tori. We do not take it personally around here that you have to deliver this information to us, so we appreciate the details. So we're going to have Al come on up.
Hello, hello. Okay, I'm going to share my screen to talk about a bit of money that's come available since last week. So I'm not sure if can't remember if PIC pushed out this communication, but this was announced on Thursday. So we've got a bit of information that's pushed out on this. To be honest, there's not a whole lot available at this point as far as details go. But what it is $1.5 million to support biosecurity measures to reduce the spread of avian influenza. to give you a quick amount of details, this is CAP funding. So CAP is a Canadian Agricultural Partnership. It is some funding that we've had some money that we were able to free up for this. The CAP windows have closed, and we were able to reopen this one. CAP runs until April 1st of March 31st of 2023. But this one is actually meant, if we here for specifically for non-supply managed poultry and waterfowl farmers, meat processors in the sector, and other related businesses. So if you're a poultry holder, you cannot own quota. You have to be at least 300 birds and have a farm business registration number. That's pretty much all the details we have there. But if you fit into that category, over 300 birds, farm business registration number, and a non-supply managed operation. So that would include waterfowl, so ducks and geese. If you farm squab, which is meat birds, if you have game birds, so quail, chuckers, pheasants. Theoretically, if you're, I don't know if there's any rat type farms over 300 birds, but they would qualify too. Even if you have a farm business registration number for the other farm business, like your regular farm business, and you have some birds over 300 birds, you would be eligible also. So that's on the farming side. Meat processors, that would be what I call our custom kill folks. So the ones that are doing our small flocks and or some of our specialty breeds. So whether that's ducks or game birds. Once again, they can't be playing in the supply managed realm. And some of our small grading stations are targets for this funding also. So there is going to be more information available come January, but long and short it is, we are going to go 70% cost share. So you'll have to put some of your own money into it. So for every $100 of improvements you make, this program will pay 70% of that. We go retroactive back to April 1st of this year, and up to $100,000 per enhanced location, up to $500,000 per business. So before everyone gets really excited and starts looking at calling us, we really don't have a whole lot to describe yet on this. But if you click on this link, it brings you to our CAP funding page, Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And literally all we have on that right now is that we have the Poultry Biosecurity Preparedness Initiative this year. That's a bullet point, and more information to come. The long and short of it is, as you go through this, anyways, this is pretty much all we have at this point. Stay tuned. Chances are we're going to be able to provide you some more information in the coming weeks. I think we only have tonight, tomorrow night, or sorry, tonight, next week, and the week after with PIC on this webinar series, but we'll probably have more information as the weeks roll on. But come January is when we'll probably be opening the windows with all the to apply and to have some of the forms to fill out. So stay tuned, keep to this page, keep to the CAP funding page also. So as more details come up, it'll be posted there. So it's a bit of exciting news. Like I said, specific for the non-supply managed commodities and groups. So hopefully we'll have some more good news for you to try and help do that. Now, when it comes to some of the things we'd be paying for, is it's things that'll help improve biosecurity on your operation. So whether it's things that are very basic, like helping you with some of the cleaning disinfection, reducing traffic, cleaning and disinfection equipment, practices to mitigate interactions between wild birds and our domestic birds. I said there'll be lots there that we hopefully want to make that net as broad as possible to capture some of the things that will actually make sense for your operation. So as I said, stay tuned. There'll be more coming up over the next little while. With that, I'll flip it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Al. I know your team is working really hard on sorting out those details, so we'll definitely, from the PIC perspective, pump out any further updates or releases that we hear about from you. So we're gonna flip it over to Chris now and hear about some of those other sorts of birds.
Thanks, Ashley. So just a quick update tonight. I wasn't able to attend last week. So in Ontario, we've had some significant changes to the migration. So we had a cold snap, which pushed birds from further north into southern Ontario. And that cold snap has also resulted in birds congregating in fairly large numbers as little back ponds and beaver ponds and etc. have frozen. So what we're seeing now is in southwestern Ontario and pockets, we have tundra swans now that have moved onto the landscape. In eastern Ontario, we have tens of thousands of snow geese. I specifically mention those birds because there's a pretty good density of poultry operations in eastern Ontario. And these snow geese appear to be a little bit naive to the virus. We're seeing outbreaks in the Midwest where hundreds or thousands of snow geese are dying. So that suggests that they are a little bit naive to it and could be infected. So if you have a backyard operation or a small flock operation in eastern Ontario, I would advise you to be really vigilant, preventing any interactions between wild birds and your flock. And that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Chris. And so some of these like snow geese and tundras, are they going to stick around in Ontario, do you think? Or are they all going to blow on through?
Most of the snow geese blow through, but the tundra swans, they will set up shop. They'll overwinter or stay at least until Christmas, until the weather, the ice pushes them out. What we see is the birds congregate on larger water bodies, especially on the Great Lakes. And so most of the province should be okay, but any poultry operations that are in the vicinity of these large concentrations, these concentrations can be pretty impressive, hundreds of thousands of birds. And with this cold weather and concentrations like that, it really facilitates transmission to any naive individuals. So just maintain your vigilance as we come towards the cooler months.
That's right. Yeah, we don't get that summer burn off benefit over the winter as much. So
yeah.
Good. Thank you for the update.
No problem.
Okay, any questions and answers? As Charlotte mentions, just pop them in the bottom there. But meantime, we're going to get Kayla's video teed up here. I was super excited about this, so I hope all of you enjoy it.
So thank you very much for having me at this talk today. And what I'm going to talk about is really monitoring poultry gut health from the outside. So I just want to give an overview of what is gut health, what exactly are we looking for when we look for gut health on the outside of the bird, and then what are some of the variations and what it is that we can see, and then how do we work on troubleshooting. So first, if we talk about, well, what exactly is gut health? And I always like this comment that everything starts with the digestive tract. When it comes to birds, in terms of producing eggs, at the end of the day, that bird has to be able to translate those nutrients into eggs, or on the other side, into kilos of meat. But the thing is that the gut really is complex. It's more than just translating those nutrients. It also acts almost like this castle with all of the protection around it, because it has a role in terms of barrier function, local immunity, or being able to protect the bird from the inside, as well as a microflora ecosystem or different bacteria that are present in the intestinal tract. So when I think of gut health overall, I really think of it as a balance between digesting and absorbing nutrients, this barrier function, this immunity and protection, as well as the microflora ecosystem. When I talk more specifically about the microflora ecosystem, what I'm talking about are the bacteria that are within the gut. So if I look at this picture here, it's actually a representation of what the microscopic look of the inside of the intestinal tract. So the pink little pieces are these finger-like projections, which are the villi, and they have large surface area which allow for digestion and absorption of nutrients. But all around, all those other pieces that you see, the purple, the blues, the oranges and the yellows, those are different bacteria that are there. And these bacteria can either be good, they can be opportunistic, so become bad under certain situations, or they can always be bad. So when we're thinking about the microbiota or the microflora within the intestinal tract, it's really important to have diversity. So many different bacteria that's there. There's always going to be a very large number of bacteria within the intestinal tract, but it's not just how many bacteria that are there, it's also who is there and what are they doing. So where exactly does the intestinal microbiota come from? It really depends on where these birds were raised. So in some situations, you may have hens which have chicks and you are able to raise these together. So then those chicks would certainly be getting their microbiota from mama hen. You also may have situations where you purchase the eggs from a hatchery or someone else who has eggs. And so they still have some of the bacteria which comes from mama hen, but they also have bacteria which could also potentially come from handling of those eggs or how those eggs are dealt with in the hatchery or incubator. Or you could have a situation where you're actually purchasing ready to lay hens, so older hens that are able to lay eggs already, and then those birds would have their bacteria come from many different areas depending on how they were raised during their rearing period, as well as what is actually happening on the farm. So you have what's coming from the hen, what's happening in the egg, but then those chicks also come, and you also have how those chicks are being raised. So what are they picking up from their environment? And they can pick up this microbiota, which or these different bacteria from their environment, which allows for a different field of opportunities of different bacteria to be present, especially if we're getting these eggs or these chicks from a situation where they're separate from their mother hen. So again, you can raise them in this area, which allows for a field of opportunities for different bacteria to come in. And if we're not careful about biosecurity, there's a lot of different bacteria and even parasites which could take over. Here are just a couple of examples of Coccidia being a parasite, as well as other bacteria like E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. So we want to make sure that we have this balance between our good bacteria, our opportunistic bacteria, and our bad bacteria, so we can maintain that balance, so we can have outcompete some of these bad bacteria. So there's many things which can have an impact on overall gut health of the bird. Generally, birds are creatures of habit, so any kind of change can really have some sort of create some sort of intestinal stress on the bird, which potentially could lead to a microbial imbalance. You have less efficient intestinal function. You may see this as perhaps there's low production, you're not getting as many eggs, or could there be an impact on the health, or could there be an impact on what the manure looks like? And like I said, there's many different impacts on gut health, from bird density in the coop, vaccine status, the coop ventilation, temperature, water access, feed access, disease, et cetera, et cetera. So when I'm starting to think about how we build gut health, really a program approach is needed, and really thinking of it from start to finish. there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't one magic thing that's going to fix everything. It's really a combination of things. So you can talk about things in terms of the additive program. What are some of the supports that you can bring to that bird through feed additives? But there's also other pieces that are important, from feed management, water management, the bird coop range, and barn management, depending on how you are raising your birds. So there's just a couple of simple things to think about for setting ourselves up for success. Again, we have to remember birds are more sensitive to changes in the environment. So you have to think to yourself, I want to continue doing what is good. So what can I change in the type of system I have to be better for the birds? So I always think of different things to jog my memory and what it is I'm going to think of. And I think of it in SLAWs, and that really stands for feed, light, litter, air, water, space, sanitation, security, and staff. What is going on between these things that I could potentially have a positive impact and continue to improve? So when we're talking about gut health, what are we looking for, and how could we look at it? So there's a whole bunch of ways that you can look at gut health that are very important ways for looking at it, whether it's with looking inside the bird, so opening these birds. Obviously, it will depend on how many you have and what is able to be done. This is where you could have a look on the inside of the bird. You could do other less invasive things, for example, taking blood or fecal samples and sending them off for analysis. And then you can also monitor health status by looking at the manure. Now, this is really what I'm going to be focusing on today, but I really want to stress that is when talking about the overall health of the bird, including the gut health of the bird, it's incredibly important to have a good connection with the veterinarian that supports small flock poultry. And being able to talk with them will help to work through what it is that you are seeing, to then help manage what's happening with your birds. So yes, you can look at the manure and what's happening there, but again, to really understand what the diseases are or the overall health of the bird, I really want to stress it's important to have that connection with the veterinarian. So I think of how do we start looking at gut health in practice? And this is where we can look around what is happening either in the coop, the range, or where you have the birds set out in a barn system, and really just taking a look at the ground and what are you seeing in terms of the manure. So it's important to have a look at that because, as we all know, birds will peck at basically anything, including the ground, manure from other birds. They will peck at it and they'll pick up whatever it is that's around. And as they're picking up whatever it is that's around, they could be picking up bacteria, viruses, parasites, and so on. And how much of the load really will depend on how these birds are kept. Are they kept close together in a coop? Are they given a certain amount of range? How much range? How often do you rotate that range? Are they in a barn system? How is the clean out? And so on and so forth. So how specifically do we look for the manure of the bird? Again, it really just takes having a look at where those birds are being housed, looking at the ground and seeing and having a look at what it is that you're seeing there on the ground. So making sure to take into consideration not just sort of one piece that you're seeing or a little bit of the manure, but take into consideration the whole area. So if you're seeing something's wrong in just one dropping, it's not necessarily representative of what's happening for all of the birds. So you really have to take that into consideration as well. So to understand what is abnormal or not normal, it's important to understand what is normal. So here, we're just having a look at a bird's manure. So at the top here, we have a combination of an intestinal dropping as well as fecal dropping. So birds have two kinds of droppings that they can produce. So the intestinal dropping normally will generally be brown in color, formed in a cylindrical shape, and usually, but not always, on the top, you'll see a white portion of it. This is what's called the urate cap. Essentially, very simply, it is the pee of the bird. They also have a cecal dropping, and a normal cecal dropping can be light to dark brown in color and actually has the consistency of toothpaste. So you want to be able to see both of these. You may not always see a ton of cecal droppings because they don't release them quite as often as they do intestinal droppings, but they will be around. So there can be many variations in what it is that's seen, both variation in what is normal, as well as variation in what is not normal. What I've done here is separate things out in terms of color scoring as well as texture scoring. So here are just a couple of examples of different colors that you could potentially see from normal. So like I said, that light to dark brown with the white urate cap. You may see something that could potentially be more towards white, something that could be green, medium to dark gray. There could be red, orange, depending on what you're seeing. And in some situations, you may see black as well. The color is always linked to variations in texture as well. So there could be different texture that you can see from normal, where it's firm, a form dropping, minimal to no particles, loosely formed with some wetness. You may see some feed particles, all the way to loose droppings with obvious fluid or mucus around the droppings, and potentially seeing feed or foreign particles or other worms that could be there. So when we combine sort of changes in color as well as changes in texture, it may give an idea of what it is that we're seeing. Is it normal or is it not normal? And if it's not normal, what specifically is happening and why is it not normal? Now, the challenge is that there could be many challenges or many issues to rule out. So something like this, it's important to be able to take note of what it is that you're seeing. Pictures are always a good thing, even though it may seem bizarre to take pictures of your poultry's manure. But it certainly is something to help to be able to give a good background to your veterinarian to say, look, this is what I'm seeing. How can we work together to improve the health of my bird or my flock? So that's with intestinal droppings. You can also see it with changes in color as well as texture with cecal droppings. So here's an example of different colors with cecal droppings. Again, we have normal, which is that medium to dark brown. You can have caramel, which is a light orange to light brown. You can see yellow, so a dull to a bright yellow, or red as well. And then the textures can range from, again, normal, that thick toothpaste-like consistency, to loose and watery appearing, or even foamy with lots and lots of bubbles there. So again, similar to what I had said with the intestinal droppings, it's important to take note of what it is that you're seeing in terms of the color and the texture. If you put those two together, it can start giving ideas of some of the challenges. But again, there's many challenges to rule out. And so it's important to be able to take notes of what you're seeing, take pictures, to be able to provide a good background when you are able to have that conversation with your poultry veterinarian, to sort of say, this is what I've been seeing. What are some of the things that we could do to maintain the health of the flock overall? It's also important to note how much you're seeing. If you're just seeing one of this, it's important to know, are you just seeing one, or are you seeing more than this? Is it covering the entire barn area or poop area, range area, the area where the birds are, or is it just a small amount? And then that can also kind of give an idea of, well, what is happening, and is this affecting just sort of one potential down bird, or is it affecting more of what I have? And again, that also helps to give a good background to the poultry veterinarian. Now, I've just talked about manure as certain indicators to help with gut health, but there are other things that also can be looked at. So if you have birds in a coop or a barn setting, you could also look at the litter condition that you have. Do you have good litter? Is it dry? spreads about in your hands quite well, or is it wet where you potentially hold it and it stays in a ball? Some cases, if it's really wet, you hold it and you squeeze it and there's water coming out. So what is that variation it is that you're seeing there in that litter if you house birds, like I said, in that coop or that barn situation? You could also have a look at the feathers. So how clean or dirty are the feathers? There's many different areas that you can look at on the bird. This part's going to be a little bit more challenging if you have birds that are darker in color, just because it'll be harder to see where the birds are dirty. You can also take a look at the foot pads or the bottom of their feet. What exactly are you seeing? Are you seeing something that is nice and clean and what you want to see with the birds, or is there some sort of cut or darkness, crusted areas in the bird? And is there a range of this? In some cases, for example, with bumblefoot, you might even see a swelling in the foot as well. So again, this is not for you to take and diagnose what is happening. This is for you to be able to take notes and be able to then have that conversation with your veterinarian to support and say, look, this is what I'm seeing. What can we do to help with the overall health of the flock? So in terms of troubleshooting at when do I even look at the birds, the litter, the range, the manure, it's certainly important to have a look at your birds every day for behavior and signs of health and disease. If you're looking specifically at the litter, range, or the manure, then ideally once weekly. You can certainly analyze more often if that's an option for you. The more you look at it, the better you'll know what's going on with the birds. And then if the birds are started as chicks, then you can start looking at the manure about 4 to 5 days post-placement, just because this is when it's going to be easier to start seeing the manure. You can certainly start sooner if you have received older birds. So in terms of who should analyze the droppings, to get consistency, it's always the same person that should do this. If there's several people looking after the birds, then they can do their analysis on their own and then compare. And then another question I get is also, well, should I only look at the manure for gut health? And again, I really want to stress here that looking at the manure is a part of a complete monitoring system. It's important to also look at and consider the environment, the feed and water consumption, mortality, performance in terms of, are your hens laying eggs? How are they generally doing and behaving? And you also have to remember that the information you're going to get out is only as good as the information that you're going to put in. If you're working with your veterinarian, they only know what you're telling them in terms of background. So the more information provided and pictures, certainly the better. And we have to remember, looking at the manure alone is not a diagnostic tool. So if the birds are sick, it's very important to be able to talk with your veterinarian. So there's a lot of different combinations of tools that can be used to monitor the flock health. Depending on sort of how many birds you have, what is there, you can certainly be able to look specifically at the intestine of down birds. There's less invasive methods of taking blood or fecal samples and sending this off for analysis, and then also monitor the health status by looking at the manure. And again, as I keep stressing, it's important to have a good connection with a veterinarian that supports a small flock poultry. So with that, I really just want to say thank you very much for listening to this talk.
All right. Thank you, Kayla. And we actually have Kayla online with us here, Sinead, as well. If you have any questions, there she is. So I'm just going to invite the rest of our speakers to come back on. We're also joined again by Tim Pasma, who was with us last week, which is great as well. So far I see one question in the Q&A. And there's just a question about funding to help wildlife rehabilitators with biosecurity, because they don't seem to find any government funding yet dealing with the front lines of wild birds coming in. So just curious if there's any ideas around some resources for that.
Well, I'll take a stab at that first, and then I'll maybe pass it off to Chris if there's any other comments. So our funding that I was just talking about earlier tonight is announced for anyone with a farm business registration number and over 300 birds. So if we have a wildlife rehabber who's got, you know, a bunch of chickens and the birds they are rehabbing and they have an FBR number, say for, because they have cattle, then they are in, right? I'm guessing it's probably a small amount, or if any, that may fall in that category. But just to give you some background as to how we got to this point where we actually have this program, it is because the non-supply managed folks were out there trying to push, how do we say this? They advocated for themselves, right? They were pushing the point that, you know, as you know, the supply managed folks get a lot of support. With the non-supply managed folks didn't have a lot, so what was available for them? So anyways, that's part of how we got to the point we are today. So anyways, I'll pass it off to Chris if you've got any other thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Unfortunately, I don't really have any resources that off the top of my head that could be available. I do recognize the important role that the rehab community has played in dealing with wild birds. So I do recognize that it's been a challenge for rehabilitation centers to either pass up on potentially helping birds that are that appear healthy for fear of bringing avian influenza into their facility, which I think is an important thing. And I do recognize that some additional funding could allow for folks to maintain some degree of service if they can quarantine properly. I'm not aware of any funding, but I can bring that up in conversations. And like Al said, the small flock folks or the non-supply managed folks advocated for themselves, and I'd recommend that the rehabilitation community does something similar when it comes to avian influenza, to try to get some additional resources. Sorry, I don't have better news on that front.
And I know this Tuesday night webinar has become a lot of things to a lot of different people. Its scope has gone beyond what Ashley and I think, and Charlotte originally viewed this to be. And yeah, we've had some folks that don't necessarily fall into what we'd say fall under the umbrella of agriculture and OMAFRRA, right? And we still recognize that there's an important avenue. There's a One Health component to this too. So this is part of the reason why we're doing this, and we have Chris and Brian here to kind of push ourselves out of that little silo that we all seem to be in. And we hope, anyways. Yeah, I wish we had more to say for the wildlife folks on that side, but yeah, unfortunately it doesn't fall within OMAFRRA's mandate. And I know that sounds like a cop out, but it is still like I have to color between the lines too.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Yep. And definitely there's been a lot of work to kind of flex some of the program fundings. That's how we were able to have this webinar series in the spring and now. So there is a lot of work going on in the background to try to kind of put out the biggest fires. And that's where this new biosecurity initiative has come out of, is just to recognize that there's a pressing need for some new equipment and things like that. So we're trying our best. So there is a question for Kayla. I've got one on the side here, but just regarding the fecal dropping poster that you showed a picture of there, is there anywhere people could access that?
Yeah, so thank you so much. We are working on getting that up on our Alltech Canada website. In the meantime, we do have digital versions, so depending on how it goes directly, perhaps if you send an email directly to Ashley, then we will make sure it gets into your hands.
But like I said, we are working on getting it up on our Alltech Canada website specifically. What I would like and what happens, getting things on the web don't always work as fast as you want it to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you showed us a few good resources that are available through the website. Are we able to share your video as a standalone if someone wanted to review it? Is that okay?
Yes, that would be okay.
Okay, so we'll have that as well so we can watch it again. Oh, the other question for you, Kayla, was, so you talked about when you see one fecal sample that looks a bit off, like what is the threshold for, I should probably call the vet?
A little bit is also you knowing your birds and what's going on. It would be different, for example, if you only have 2 birds versus if you have 300 versus 10,000, 50,000, etc. So it's kind of like percentage of what you're seeing, in addition to what are the birds looking like overall. So if most of your birds are healthy, standing up, nicely feathered, good, depending on what kind of birds you're looking at, but sort of good color to them, generally overall looking healthy, and you only see a couple, then it's something to be aware of. Versus on the other hand, if you're seeing most of your, not most, sort of 30 to 40% give or take of the space that you're in is covered in sort of some of these not normal, in addition to, okay, well, now I'm seeing more than just one bird starting to not look healthy. So maybe feathers are ruffled, they're huddled in together, maybe a bit paler, sort of other things that you're looking at. The behavior isn't what is normal, what you would normally see, then those are times where you start thinking, okay, now it's time to contact the vet, in addition to seeing other things like mortality or other things that you could be hearing. Again, it's going to be a little bit different having 1 or 2 birds versus 300 versus 10,000 and so on. So it's you ultimately know your birds best, and I always go, when in doubt, it's better to call and talk with someone than let it sit and fester.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that. So we have a question related to the survivability of AI in a clean straw shed if it were in a bale. So we're recognizing someone's maybe using straw as bedding and had this acres and acres and acres of straw sitting out in a field that some birds might have come in contact with. What can we say to help out there?
So I think the answer is it depends. So it depends on how cold it is, how dry the straw is, how much heat treatment it's gotten, right? So assuming it was baled in August, right, we shouldn't have had a lot of wild waterfowl traveling through the area at the time, right? But who's to say that you maybe baled a duck into a bale of straw, which can happen, right? At the end of the day, it is temperature dependent and dry, right? If it's dry and hot, there's probably not going to be much chance of AI surviving on that for a long time. But if you've got, I don't know, and this is where Chris and I struggle, right? Do we have mallards in a barn? We shouldn't. Do we have mallards in a straw shed? I really hope we don't. I'd be more concerned about that. Do you have rodents in the straw that have been feeding on a dead waterfowl? I'd be more concerned about that. So yeah, it like I said, when did the virus get deposited in the straw? How long has it been there, and how dry and how hot has it been? Kind of is your thing. It doesn't last. It doesn't survive very long in the environment outside of a host. And like between Chris and I think Tim Pasman's on there too. If you guys want to throw anything in there, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of mirror what Al's saying, I think for the most part, if straw's baled in August or even early September and it's It's sat out there to dry. That would expose any feces from the birds, from the wild birds to UV and heat, which would help to kill it. It's a dry environment. I think the risk is relatively low. I don't think it's no risk, but I think it's relatively low compared to all the other challenges that backyard folks, or small flock folks have to deal with when it comes to avian influenza. I think there's many bigger risk factors that you're having to address over compared to straw.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I feel for you, to the person who wrote this question, because it is a very stressful decision. But at the end of the day, we're kind of at the mercy of the natural processes that are happening. So it's just a little hard to pin down a black and white answer on that. So hopefully that helps you make some decisions. We have a question for Tori. Can you discuss what's going on in BC? It just seems like things are heating up out there.
Hi, I don't know a lot about what's going on in BC, and I'm going to be completely honest. I've been mainly focused here in Ontario and what's going on here, just because with our different structures of groups of people that we have working with each province, there is a set liaison, which is my role, out west right now, working with their industry and their small flock groups and all of the groups out there. From what I can see, yes, it is spiraling. There is quite a few cases out there. I wouldn't necessarily say it's out of control. We are on top of all of the cases. It's just really hard to manage with the wild bird population. But from I can't speak too much to it, and I'm not gonna talk a lot about it just because I don't know a lot about it, but I can look more into it and see if I can have maybe some information for next week on kind of what's happening around each province.
Thanks.
Actually, and that's actually a great segue into a comment I wanted to make from last week. So last week, can you remember? Yes, it was only last week that the minister's order expired. And why did we have the minister's order for the commingling? Is because we had a high risk, right? We dropped the order. Now we have, like, literally since we dropped the order, we've had 3 now commercial operations go positive. This is big numbers of birds, and it's going to have an impact to the Ontario poultry industry. It is one of those things where I know this weekend there was a ton of birds that were moved at auction. If we see stuff that's going to be called into Tori as far as wild bird, sick bird calls and more positives, that could easily put us into the situation that we have in BC, right? So if I can reiterate anything, it's the fact about quarantining birds when you bring them back. If you're buying birds, if you're selling birds, but if you can, just don't do it, right? Because the risk is still there. And I was really leery 3 weeks ago when people were saying we haven't had a new positive since October 25th. We're in the clear, and I knew we were in trouble as soon as people started thinking that. So, that being said, listen to what Chris said. There's still lots of birds that are moving, and if things get heated up again, we have that order still that we can utilize if we have to. We don't want to have to do it, but it's really not in our hands. Sorry, not in our hands. It's in your hands as to whether or not we're going to be in a situation like BC.
All right. So if you have any last questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A there. We did have someone also ask about the previous recordings. So they're actually all on our YouTube channel, which when you click the video through our website, doesn't bring the channel up. So either go onto YouTube and look up Poultry Industry Council, or we can probably spend a couple minutes tomorrow and just get the previous recording link up on the website to make it easy to find. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So with that, I just want to say thanks so much, Kayla. We spent a bunch of time talking about your presentation and then recording it, and then we hooked you to come online tonight live with us, which we really appreciate your time. And as always, Tori, Al, and Chris, and all the other gang in the background here, thanks for joining us again. 2 sessions left. We're working hard to get some interesting, useful content left behind so that when the series is over, there's still lots of resources and tools in your tool belt. So see you all next week.